Lillian and I were actually just saying that we first met at Book Passage last January, and that was to celebrate my book. And so now I'm super excited to be back here to celebrate her book. There is a mix of personal anecdotes from Lillian's life. There is a mix of practical tips. There's a lot of interactive components as well, so that you don't feel like you're being talked at. And ultimately, this is not going to be a get rich in 6 weeks kind of scheme. It's very realistic and it's very practical, and that was something that I appreciated a lot when I was reading your book. In your introduction, you mentioned that money was often, sometimes, a stressful topic at home. So can you just take us a little bit through that journey? And at what point did you have that turning point in your relationship with money? At what point did it go from being stressful to something that you can now educate so many people about?
Yeah, I remember when I was younger, I feel like it was a very anxious topic at home, and feeling that anxiousness kind of filled my own subconscious growing up. And so my parents, when I have memories of my family growing up in terms of finances specifically, it was mostly due to arguments that I would hear between my family, or or the fear of running out of resources at some point, which were really real fears that we've gone through at certain times in my life. And so when I was growing up, I had a tendency to I guess the mindset of always wanting to hoard or save, and was really afraid of spending because I felt like I would lose control in that sense. And I had that mindset for a really long time actually.
Yeah, that's one thing that I really love that you touched on in your book. How we can go from a mindset of scarcity to a mindset of abundance. I think that was one of my biggest takeaways from reading your book. So can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I guess for me personally, I didn't really feel that I had more of that type of abundance mindset until after college, to be honest. I was just very anxious about what my life would look like after college. When I was younger, there were certain points in my childhood where I was I never really want to go through this again or feel a certain way about a family situation or a financial upbringing. And so in my adulthood, I'd say what really changed for me was, I guess it's the feeling proving someone wrong. There wasn't an external person, but I felt like I had to prove something of myself, and that really drove me a lot intrinsically. It's a little bit hard to explain, but I think a lot of my fellow immigrant friends can relate to that. But I also felt it was kind of exposure therapy. So the more that I did something, that a really small win that I achieved, I was oh, this proof that I can do something, and then I was just it made me more confident and to keep going forward.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel in a way with this book, you've done the hard work for a lot of us, because right now there is so much information out there on so many different platforms, but you have kind of gone through the process of synthesizing everything into this one book so that we can just consult one single resource. So I found it very helpful. And I think a lot of people in this audience know you from TikTok. I know a little bit about the backstory of how this book came to be, but can you just tell everyone in the audience how you got the idea for writing this book? What was the process like?
Yeah, so you touched on something really interesting, which is that there's a lot of information out there. And I think most people would fall into 2 buckets because of this. The first bucket is because there's a lot more access, it's really easy to get started early or to learn about investing topics early on. And I'd say I fall into this bucket mostly. And I'd say the other bucket in this situation is because there's so much out there, a lot of people don't know where to start, or they feel paralyzed by the time they start, and so they just need some more hand-holding in terms of this is a more synthesized guide of you get everything you know in a singular book versus trying to piecemeal or DIY everything together. Honestly, I did a lot of DIYing when I was learning, and so I wish I had a more concise, relatable resource when I was first interested in this topic.
Yeah, it's a good thing that you created what you were looking for a few years ago. So kind of just take us behind the scenes of this book. How was it created? How did the initial idea come about? I think it was about 1.5 years to 2 years in the making.
Yeah, so I was doing a lot of just content creation, just sharing my journey post-grad. I wasn't really thinking too much about what I wanted this to look like, but I knew that when I was first watching YouTube videos, I really enjoyed when people shared their personal journeys. I thought I was oh cool, even though I I was like a recent college grad, I felt like there were still people who were on a similar path, maybe a little bit younger than me, who could benefit from information I was sharing or experiences. And I was on TikTok for like 2 years, and I had the opportunity to work with a publisher to create like a new like category defining book for Gen Z that was a missing resource in the market. And so it was really fun to write and start the book. And so essentially to answer your question about the writing process itself, I started the writing process in, I'd say like late August of last year. And basically what I did is, because I work a full-time job, I had to make sure that all my time was allocated properly. And I would write like a chapter every 2 weeks. I would finish a chapter. And so maybe like an hour of writing at night and then on weekends. And so I was able to finish the first draft in like 4 to 5 months. But it's really surprising, the publishing process is very long. I didn't know how long it would take.
Yeah, that's always one of those things that take people by surprise when they're not familiar with the industry. So it's interesting because you started off in TikTok, which is a medium that is very grounded in visuals and audio, and it's like a full sensory experience. And then you move over to writing a book, which is ultimately just black and white words on paper. So what was that transition like?
I'd say from a writing perspective, it wasn't super different. It felt like I was just writing a really long like video script, which I've done numerous amounts of times. But I'd say, like you said, because TikTok and like just videos are more engaging, you show more your personality and other, tidbits to get people's attention. I felt like it was a little bit more tough to convey like my personality or certain ways that I speak on writing, because writing comes across differently than when you speak to an audience or when you talk. That's a big difference, I'd say.
Yeah, and as someone who writes fiction, I'm very intrigued by the process of creating a non-fiction book. For instance, there's so much that gets covered in this book. You talk about budgeting and crypto and filing income taxes, all that fun stuff. So how do you decide what topics would be most relevant for your audience? And how do you decide how to strike that balance between wanting to cover a lot of topics, but at the same time offering enough detail on each topic so that it's actionable?
Yeah, I actually struggle with this because I feel like I tend to ramble when I speak and when I write. And so in terms of actual topics, I was just thinking back to when I was on my own journey and figuring out like what would be the most helpful for like other readers who are on the similar path. And so I'll also touch on the structure of the book a little bit as well, what you can see from the book. But essentially I started off with the context of the whole Gen Z, like generational differences, mindset, like we talked about earlier. That was a big push for me, and so I think that's really important in terms of that. In terms of like the tactical stuff, I think a lot of personal finance content is very similar from like person to person, book to book. I'd say some of the main differences I tried to put in here were like more like modern focused topics. So a lot of like different shopping experiences like buy now pay later, digital tools, platforms, like economy stuff that is more like prevalent now. And some of my own personal anecdotes and stories. And I think with nonfiction, I think it's a little bit harder to express like your personality. And so that's also why I try to include like different case studies, examples. Before I actually wrote the book, I collected a lot of quotes and testimonials from my community and asking them to kind of explain like, oh, what are some of the problems or issues that you think is prevalent in terms of like financial wellness and financial management? And so they're really great in seeing like what are people kind of looking for and what's out there. At the end of the book, there's also, for each chapter, there's like 2 columns. So there's like the old rules, which is like an old-fashioned way of thinking, and like the new rules, the title of the book, which is more like, oh, like this is how Gen Z thinks, this is more modern. There's also workbook exercises at the end of a lot of the chapters, so you can implement what you've learned. So it's really great in terms of like interactive resource.
Yeah, I love those lists at the end of every chapter where you compare the old myths and like having a newer, fresher mindset towards finance. And
Exactly.
Since you mentioned the title, The New Money Rules, can you tell us a little bit about how the title came to be and also how you created the very eye-catching green and black and white cover.
We wanted to first like categorize this book as like a Gen Z, like defining generational book. And so we want to make that really clear. The first title of the book was called Gen Z Money Moves, and we actually thought that was the one we would go with for the longest time. And towards like the very last minute, we changed it to the new money rules, partly because we didn't want to silo the book only for Gen Z. Even though it says Gen Z, I think people from different walks of life can still find it very helpful and informative, and so we didn't want to stick to that. But it is in the subtitles, so when people search it up, it's very prevalent. In terms of the cover, I think green symbolizes like wealth and money, so I think that was a really great choice. And I really like how we incorporated some of like the handwriting, like the handwritten parts to the text, and this makes it feel more approachable and friendly. So that's how it came about.
Yeah, I mean, was any of the handwritten text based on your own handwriting by any chance, or was it just like a font?
It was a font, but I've sent some samples to my publisher, so maybe they try to find a font that was similar.
Okay, do you think it looks similar to actual handwriting?
I guess when I sign the book, you guys can let me know.
Yeah, guys, let us know. And also, shout out to every single person who wore green today, or who wore white. Thanks for dressing on team. I like green. And another thing that I want to talk about, as a Gen Zer, is the concept of mental health. Like you touched on in your book, personal finance can often be a very stressful topic. It can be very challenging. And I think we live in an age where, because of social media, it's so easy to see what other people are doing. It's so easy to fall into comparison. So how can we nurture our own personal finance without falling into the trap of comparison?
Yeah, I've honestly fell into that trap many times, and sometimes that happens when I see headlines in the media or when I see like social media posts. But I think you just have to I think for me, what helps me a lot is like grounding myself in like what do I actually want and what do I actually want to like get out of everything. Because everyone's journey is different, and sometimes I catch myself comparing myself to other people, but like the only thing that you control is your own decisions and your own inputs and how you improve from your past self and not other people. But I'd say like in terms of like mental health comparisons, I learned a lot from people that I read books from or in the media. But I'd say like I try to pinpoint the things that are like helpful for me personally and ignore like the rest if it's not that healthy or helpful. But how would you approach this yourself?
I have forgotten my own question. Is this alright? Hang on, it's not mental health, wasn't it? How do I approach it?
Like comparisons and stuff.
Comparisons and stuff. I remind myself, comparison's the thief of joy. Applies to every single thing. I can control what other people do. I can only control how I respond to something. And also, I read a book. And that's how I learn. Okay, so beyond numbers, what does living a good financial life look like for you?
Yeah, so for me, I actually didn't really have much clarity to that type of question for a while until maybe like last year. But I'd say it's mostly like the ability to like help out my parents or take them on experiences that they haven't had when I was growing up. Freedom to like pursue more opportunities or take career risks, so kind of like safety in a sense. Like resting without guilt and be able to treat the people around me that I love and be able to do that without like worrying.
Yeah, and okay, so personally, I think one thing I hear a lot is, people saying that we should try to be passionate about our jobs, like you shouldn't be doing something that you're not passionate about because YOLO. But on the other hand, there are also people who say, a job at the end of the day is just to pay the bills. You don't have to feel like passionate about it per se. So what is your stance on this?
Oh yeah, that's a very relevant question. Yeah, I'd say there's like a healthy mix of both because we live in a world of supply and demand. So I think there is like a sense of like, you're doing something to help fund your life. But I also think you can also take parts of your personality or hobbies to combine into your work. And so for example, like when I was in high school, I actually really wanted to pursue art school at some point. Like I was very adamant about this for like 2 months and then it kind of disappeared. But I really like doing like creative stuff and artistic stuff. And when I got to college, I actually ended up studying business. And I was thinking like, oh, like what are ways I can incorporate like my natural tendencies or hobbies into my work? And so, of course, a lot of trial and error, but I try to approach things from that lens. But I think there's always like sacrifices you have to make.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing you talk about in your book as well is this culture of side hustle within Gen Z, especially living in a place like Silicon Valley, where there's always that sense of pressure that if you're going to be doing something, you might as well monetize it, you might as well make a startup out of it. So in this kind of environment, how can we continue to nurture and explore our hobbies without feeling that pressure to try to monetize it or to push it to the extreme?
Personally, I'd say I try to set aside like certain activities that are not monetizable. So for me, it's usually like drawing or painting, which is something that I grew up in childhood doing. And so that's really fun for me. But I know I talk about this a lot in the book, where I think because of the economy and just how the technology, there's just more access to opportunities. I also think it's a very beautiful thing to be able to have the ability to monetize your passions or hobbies to begin with. And so there's no right or wrong answer. It just depends like if doing that like makes it less fun for you, or if you want to reserve that to doing something that takes off the pressure in terms of that kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. Okay, and so one last hardball question for me. If there is one message you want your readers to take away from this book, what would that be?
I'd say that the message that I would love to relay is that the end goal of everything, even though this book is literally about money, the end goal isn't the money, it's about the people you surround yourself with, the experiences that you have, and just being able to use money as a tool to fund the life you want to live, and also understanding what your end goal is, not comparing yourself to other people to the extent that our society perpetuates us to.
Yeah, I like what you said about how money isn't the end, it's just a means for you to achieve what you truly want in life. Okay, and we're gonna move into a speed round, and then we're gonna open the floor up to the audience for your questions, so start thinking of them. Okay, so first speed round question, and just say whatever comes to your mind. In your book, you talk about being able to use money to celebrate your wins and your achievements. So how have you celebrated becoming a published author?
I have not actually gotten myself anything yet for that milestone, but that might change soon. But actually, the most recent purchase I made was a desk microphone for like speaking and podcasting. But I feel it's more of a business expense. It's not a pleasure purchase, but I'll definitely love some ideas.
Yeah, guys, give us some ideas later when you're asking her to sign your books. So you talked about the desk mic being your most recent purchase. What was your most recent purchase that you regretted?
I would say that this is not very recent, but something that I fall into sometimes is like I subscribe to a service that's recurring, and then I forget to like cancel it, and so I checked my statement about this recurring subscription that I never used, and I was like, wow, that was something I needed to cancel.
Yeah, that happens to me all the time. You're so sneaky about it, and it makes it really hard to cancel.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you prefer print book, ebook, or audiobook?
I would say print, but I actually recently got a Kindle last year, and I've actually gotten a lot of my books from the library, and so I've been really into the ebooks lately.
Amazing, and I believe your book is available in all three formats, is that right?
Oh yes, paperback, ebook, and audio.
Yeah, okay. When you were writing, what was one snack or one drink that you had to have with you?
I really like green grapes. Like, that's very specific, but they're just like for writing, it felt very like I can concentrate.
Yeah, it's refreshing, especially if you freeze them. Frozen green grapes are like a little burst of refreshing energy in your mouth.
Oh, for sure.
You mentioned a few different side hustles that you have done. What was the most chaotic side hustle you've tried?
So basically in the book I mentioned like my plushie side business, but at the same time I was also doing dropshipping before dropshipping was cool. And so I did that for a little bit. They're mostly like, it was like 2013 era, these like squishy toys, and they they would like resell a lot on like Amazon, like eBay, different platforms, and so short answer is dropshipping.
Okay, I'm just trying to imagine you if you were doing it right now with the whole Labubu craze going on. It would be like a Lillian Labubu business. Would you consider yourself a morning writer or a night owl?
Definitely a night owl. All my writing happens at night.
How do you keep your mind fresh for writing after a long day of work?
Honestly, just like dinner and like fuel, and then I would take like a exercise break in front of my TV, which sounds kind of counterintuitive, but I would watch like these fitness influencers and like do the exercise. So that helps a lot.
Yeah, and also the green breaks. What is one fun fact about you that the audience would be surprised to know?
I'm not sure if this is super surprising, but I am very early to everything, and so I have like very anxious like response when it comes to like being late to stuff. I really don't like that, so I'm always extremely early to stuff. I actually came here at like 3:50.
Oh my gosh. Okay. When you're writing, do you prefer having a music or a total silence?
Usually silence. Sometimes I would put on like a jazz like background music, but typically like no music.
Okay. What is the worst financial advice you have ever been given?
I was 19 or 20 years old, didn't really know much about what I was doing, and someone told me to put like $100 in Dogecoin, so I did it, and it was not good.
Well, you win some, you lose some. Okay, I think, actually, sorry, one more question from me. What is next for you? Are you planning any more books?
We'll see how the first one does.
Yeah, guys, you heard that. Okay, and now, thank you so much. Please join me in another round of applause for Lillian.